Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Sports Insight with your host Indus Khan. And yes, as you know, we give you sports information from all across the globe. You guys can surely reach out to us on our social media handle, which is @Indus News Sports. That basically works both for Twitter and for Instagram. But anyways, we'll go to the headlines first. And yes, from the world of NBA, Brooklyn Nets managed to win against Bucks 115-107, while Hawks defeat 76ers 128-124 in the semi-final game 1. And yes, from the world of golf, Patrick Cantlay actually managed to win playoff with Colin Morikawa at Memorial Tournament. And yes, from the world of cricket, England versus New Zealand, the first test continued and it came up to a conclusion of a draw. And yes, from the world of tennis, Serena Williams knocked out of the 4th round of French Open, while Roger Federer's withdraw to protect his body after 2 knee injuries. Talking about football, yes, Manchester City's Kevin De Bruyne actually won the PFA Player of the Year award for the 2nd successive season. And yes, those were the headlines, and we're talking about the semi-finals in the NBA. And yes, it has been an interesting journey so far. If you look at Brooklyn Nets getting their victory 115-107 over Bucks, and the 76ers losing against the Hawks 124-128. But to discuss the in-depth analysis of where the direction is heading for the conference semi-finals, we have with us Austin Krell all the way from Philadelphia, US. Austin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So Austin, we'll talk about the first game to begin with. We're going to talk about the Brooklyn Nets beating the Bucks. Eventually, I was still seeing, and we all wanted to see that trio that we always talk about. But yet again, during these times, we saw James Harden getting off the game at the very start. And you know, I think it's a very tricky journey for them. Now they have to believe in the duo, but they still managed to win against the Bucks. So we'll start off talking about this match to begin with. So what's your take on this one?
When you go out and you get a third star like James Harden, you're kind of basically trying to bet on the idea that if one guy goes down, you have insurance against an injury. So Harden goes down, but you still have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, and they have some pretty capable role players behind those two. So regardless of any individual injury, the Nets seem to have the horses to take on the Bucks, as evidenced by what happened in Game 1.
Right, and if we look obviously at Kevin Durant, he managed to score 29 points. Obviously, Joe Harris kind of added 19 points to it, and Kyrie Irving, of course, scored the 25 points. And we still look back into when it all started for Brooklyn Nets. It's been a very rare occasion for us all and all the fans out there for Brooklyn Nets to see the trio making their magic out there. It's always been the duo. And now we are currently looking at James Harden not even probably playing the second game. So how do you see Brooklyn Nets facing the Bucks again for the Game 2 tomorrow?
Yeah, Game 1 is typically a feeler out game in that you prepare based on what you've seen in the past and the film you watched. But Game 2, the Bucks are going to come back. They're going to adjust, and it's going to be very interesting to see what the Nets do in terms of how they sort of handle that attack. But they came out, they handled their business in Game 1 without Harden for most of it. So the pressure is now really on the Bucks to make that response. But it's going to be a lot really about this Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant sort of settling it into what makes them great. It's going to be involving them sharing with their teammates and getting other people involved, but also doing what makes them great. And the Nets are a deeper team than a lot of people thought, so they should be in good shape.
Right. But if we look at, obviously, we talk about Giannis, obviously, he managed to score those 34 points. And if we look at the first 2 quarters to begin with, the Brooklyn Nets were 30, the Milwaukee Bucks were 32. In the second quarter, they came up to 33 and 29. But if we look back into the first, obviously, the first half was purely based on Brooklyn Nets side. And the second half, if we look at the scoring lineup, specifically if we talk about the last quarter, 17 points by Brooklyn Nets, while Bucks obviously managed to get to 23. So how do you see, because I see Brooklyn Nets going towards the slope in the end and not managing to score those solid points that they were scoring in the first 3 quarters?
Yeah, it's a good point. You could make the case that Brooklyn saw they were up 17 whatever points in the middle of the fourth quarter and maybe took their foot off the gas a little bit. And I think you'll see them have their best players in at the end of games if it's close like that. But in terms of a deviation from the first 3 quarters to the fourth quarter, in terms of defense and scoring, that's usually dictated by the flow of the game. So I mean, if the Nets are up 20, they're gonna try to avoid injury and get their main pieces out and let the guys that are part of the reserve unit get their minutes. So that's kind of just dictated by the flow of the game, really.
Right. And if we look back into the play-in games, if I remember, there were 2 consecutive games that Bucks faced with Brooklyn Nets, if I'm not wrong, and they managed to win both of those games. So how do you contemplate in the upcoming game, which is surely going to be one of the most watched games for now, because they're going to face each other again? And I still remember those 2 games, one of the trio was missing in Brooklyn Nets. So one of the trio is going to be missing again. And I think Bucks need to just push the gas on their end, because I think they truly have that potential of getting there. And if they manage to break this barrier against Brooklyn Nets, I think they're going a long way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they usually say that a series hasn't, really changed until the road team wins the game. Right. So the Bucks, even if they go down 2-0, are they're obviously not in a great position, but they're still, very much alive. You win 2 on your home court, you're right back in the thick of things in the series. I think what it comes down to is, Giannis has to be Giannis. He has to be great, but you also need your peripheral pieces to step up, like Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton, and it helps if the Bucks are knocking down shots. If they can shoot anywhere close to what they were doing against the Miami Heat, I think that changes the series pretty significantly.
Right. And in terms of, would want to know more about the conference semifinal this way, that now that the first game is obviously won by the Brooklyn Nets against the Bucks, how would the second game define which team goes forward? Because, for instance, if the score margin is almost the same as it is in terms of, for instance, Bucks managed to win that game and Nets are behind. So how will they contemplate on taking that one team forward? What's the actual formula for that?
So, in terms of going back to Milwaukee up 2-0, it's really going to be a matter of the Nets understanding that they've taken care of business so far. They're up 1-0, but you really have to have faith in the likes of Blake Griffin and Joe Harris and the other pieces that are on the roster. And if the Nets continue to get their typical play from their 2 stars that they have there, and then they continue to sort of enable the bleeding, with their other role players and whatnot, they should be fine. Whereas for Milwaukee, still down 2-0, it's not great, like I said, but it's you're going back to your home arena, the chance to tie it 2-2 or get on the board there. But Milwaukee has to come out. They have to come out with urgency, more so than they had in game 1. I mean, listen, it shouldn't sit right with them that they lost game 1 by such a margin,
right,
when the home team didn't have James Harden.
Right. Anyways, we're looking forward for that. And obviously, as you're based in Philadelphia, now I would want to talk about the more in-depth analysis of the Philadelphia 76ers, who lost against the Atlanta Hawks, and which was a super close call match, 124-128. And I would surely want your take on where exactly, because 76ers have their own space, have their own persona in terms of the team itself. I think they're in terms of their performance. If we only talk about Joe Embiid, I think he's one of the prime players for the team. Where exactly did you think, or do you think, that 76ers went wrong in terms of losing at this very close call margin against the Hawks?
Yeah, they came back pretty remarkably in the fourth quarter and really put the pressure on Atlanta to keep the lead down the stretch. I would say that the issue in that game was just early on a lack of urgency. They committed a lot of turnovers that were unforced, and the coaching staff kept the bench unit in for far too long. Philadelphia's bench is not that good, really at all. And they let them sit there for a while, and the Hawks were able to really put a hurting on the Sixers and put them in a hole that was, too much for them to come back from. But they have a lot to learn from that first game. They made an admirable comeback, but they can't come out like that again in game two. You can't go down 2-0 heading on the road. So
absolutely. And if we look at, as you're discussing, if we talk about the first half, if you look at the first half, obviously Atlanta Hawks were 42 in the first quarter. 76ers only scored 27 points. And same goes for the second quarter, that they scored 27 points and Atlanta Hawks scored 32 points. But the last two quarters, which is the second half, in both of the quarters in the second half, 76ers were way ahead, and specifically in the last quarter. But I still think that they need to be more focused at the start rather than being, or maybe doing what they did in the end or in the second in the second half.
Yeah, I totally agree. They came. I mean, a prime sign of your level of urgency and your level of focus is unforced turnovers. And the Sixers had a lot of that in the first quarter. Really, this team is going to live and die with the play of Joel Embiid and the complementary play of Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris. So if Joel Embiid isn't healthy, you can ostensibly forget it. He looked pretty good to go yesterday. He looked pretty good in game one, right. And in game two, he's gonna have to come out and do the same. But it's really going to be about them coming out and really playing with urgency and focus that they didn't have in the first quarter of game one.
Hope for the best that, the upcoming game on Wednesday, which is the game 2, 76ers versus Hawk, come up to that conclusive side that we're looking at. And once the game finishes, we'll surely reach out to you for your in-depth analysis. Thank you very much for being a part of the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So yes, was the in-depth analysis from Austin Corral, all the way from Philadelphia, US, and he definitely wants the 76ers to be more on the offensive side rather than the defensive side on the game, which is on Wednesday. And not to forget that the game 2, which is coming up your way, will be Nets versus Bucks. Don't forget to check that out. We'll surely give you the update. It's going to be super interesting. But anyways, what we'll do is we'll take a quick break, and once we take the break and be back, there's more news coming up your way. So see you guys after the break. And yes, welcome back from the break. And yes, before the break, we were discussing, obviously, the in-depth analysis in terms of the NBA and the semifinals, the conference semifinals that have been having, and there's so much more coming up. We'll surely be updating you guys on that, but not to forget that we give you information about sports from all across the globe. So we definitely jump over to the world of golf. Yes, talking about golf, we talk about the Memorial Tournament, how Patrick Cantlay actually managed to win against Colin Morikawa. And to discuss the in-depth analysis, we have with us our golf expert, Keel Christensen, all the way from US. Keel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Great. So Kyle, let's start off with obviously the tournament that just finished. Obviously, we're talking about the Memorial Tournament. And when the Memorial Tournament started, the round 1 could not be completed at the day 1. But anyways, eventual conclusion is that Cantlay managed to win after the playoffs against Colin Morikawa, and they were pretty neck to neck. Even though, if you remember, the day 1, the round 1, which it did not actually complete on the day 1, which had to move on because of the weather updates. So how is your take, and what is your internal take with regards to your experience in the world of golf that the situation ended up letting Cantlay win his 5th title?
Right. So those weather delays are extremely unpredictable, of course. And in some ways, some players like that because what happened was some almost torrential downpours on that first day. and the night after that first day, which softened up the course tremendously. So the greens were much more receptive throughout the tournament than they generally are at Muirfield Village.
Right.
Muirfield's kind of like Augusta National in some respects, with really thick rough. So it's a very difficult course. Right. You have to be extremely precise off the tee and onto the greens. And the slightly softer greens after that first day of rains helped some people out, like Morikawa and Cantlay for two examples. They're both excellent iron players, and they hit a lot of greens, except right down towards the end when they started missing a couple as they were duking it out.
Right. But if you look at the day one, obviously Morikawa was 2 under, and yes, not only that, and a lot of players did not manage to play that day, and they had to continue that one round on the second day. So how effective was it, or how helpful was it for the players, as you mentioned, that after the rain and everything settled in, I think it was more helpful for the players to play on the day two?
Well, yeah, I think that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? So they had to play more golf on the second day and
right.
walk longer, and it's hot and humid in the Midwest this time of year, and after the rains it became more so. So it was physically demanding, but at the same time, as I say, that it did soften up the course for the longer players who weren't as affected in their drives off the tee shots. They could still get some distance, and then they could stick the greens a little bit better. So a little of both. So more golf, more tired, but some better control of the golf ball.
Right. And if you look at obviously the golf, the tournament itself, if you talk about the 17th hole that Cantlay played, and he managed to make that priceless birdie, a few shots are out there that actually changed the entire fate of the game. Because if we currently look at, I think they were going neck to neck, if I'm not wrong here.
Yes, they certainly were. And down the finishing stretches, yeah, Cantlay pulled out that birdie on 17, and Morikawa had a couple of loose or unfortunate drives, like on the last hole where he ended up bouncing off a tree and back into a fairway bunker.
Right.
And Cantlay didn't have a great drive that hole either, but he was able to make a better swing at it where he was kind of up by the cart path on the right.
Right.
And that's what you have to deal with when you're playing a difficult course under extreme pressure. It was nice to see the crowds back, right. So that area that Cantlay was in, for example, was trampled down much more than it would have been if we were still without a gallery.
Right.
It would have been quite thick up there, so that helped.
But I would want to know more, because a lot of tournaments have actually passed by recently in terms of golf, and I've definitely heard a lot about obviously Collin Morikawa making his moves. We talk about Jordan Spieth, we talk about DeChambeau. Cantlay is one of the players that, even though he managed to get his 5th career win, would you like to add more in-depth analysis on his experience and how he has managed to come where he is right now? Because would want to know more on his career.
Certainly, yeah. Patrick Cantlay is an interesting guy in that he doesn't strike me as being all that interesting, quite frankly. He's very kind of what we might call a steady Eddie. He plays his game. It's solid in all respects, not outstanding in any.
Right.
Really, I mean, people may argue with me about that, but from tee to green and on the greens, he's just solid all the way around. He doesn't have a lot of weaknesses, and he's fairly quiet. He plays his game. He's not flashy, and he's very often in contention and almost always in the money. And this time the money was almost $1.7 million. So
right.
He can really play. And in recent majors, he's been one of the odds-on favorites before just about every major, some of which he hasn't performed quite as well in, but he's always in the conversation, but kind of low-key in the conversation.
Yes, low-key is, I guess, the right word, because I have not really heard a lot of bling-bling when it comes to, when we talk about Cantlay himself.
Right, exactly, yeah. He goes about his business. He's not going to, I would be very surprised if he's even anywhere near this new social media
right.
bonus pool that the PGA is instituted. that Koepka and DeChambeau and Homa and others that are, you know, kind of very present on social media are looking at. Cantlay is not going to be one of those guys.
Right. And if we talk about the bling bling people, I would surely want to, you know, have your take on obviously the big names. What happened with DeChambeau? What happened with Jordan Spieth? You know, I mean, because, you know, if you look at their stat on the leaderboard, you know where they stand, and I know where they stand right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, DeChambeau, Spieth, McIlroy, they're all playing well, but they, aside from a couple of tournaments that they've all won fairly recently, of course, they have a couple of Achilles heels or holes that turn out to be detrimental in the course of the tournament to them kind of breaking through again. I mean, they're all fantastic players. They're all playing well, but they, you know, a wild drive here or there. DeChambeau tries to carry a tree that he can't quite get over and or hit some off wedges. I mean, DeChambeau, for example, all of his irons are exactly the same length. They're about the length of a 6-iron,
right? And
including his wedges, which makes it, as Nick Faldo said in one of the recent broadcasts, pretty hard to get feel for a wedge that's that long. But it's worked for him obviously several times, including a major. So yeah, so.
That's pretty much it. All right. Yeah. Your quick take, before we go, I just want your quick take. Obviously, you have a great experience in terms of golf. What's your quick take on Phil Mickelson, who managed to win the PGA, you know, a few weeks ago?
Oh, that was fabulous. You know, people have given Phil a hard time for being kind of a know-it-all, for being a little cocky his whole career. Right. And he's one of the best of all time, and so well deserved. I've had several personal exchanges with him, right. Spent some time with him. He's been nothing but pleasant and engaging and fun and wonderful to the crowd and to pro-am partners and so forth. So it was really nice to see him validate the things he's been saying over the past couple of years, that his game is, you know, he's been working on a lot of stuff, working hard physically and on his game, and it was coming together, and no one kind of believed him. And it was lovely to see it actually come together like he said it would. Right.
One more individual that I would surely want to talk about, I would want to talk about, obviously, Hideki, who managed to win the Masters. What's your quick take on him?
Hideki Morikawa, I mean, as one golf analyst said, he will never have to buy dinner the rest of his life in Japan, because he's been raised to a kind of a demigod status. He was already a hero, and now he's, you know, quite amazing. He is. I actually have expected him to play a little bit better than he has following the Masters, but I totally understand that he's still probably on a little bit of a buzz from that win, because that was really remarkable. I lived in Japan for almost 4 years, and I know how much the Japanese people love golf and love that win. So it's truly remarkable to see that happen, and I'm so happy for him and for Japan.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for being a part of the show and discussing the world of golf with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. So that was Christensen, and yes, he managed to give us in-depth analysis of the Memorial. Obviously, he talked about the Patrick Cantlay win over Colin Morikawa. It was an interesting match, and he obviously talked about the big names out there. Phil Mickelson, he definitely interviewed him at once, and, you know, he told us how he interacts with him and what kind of person he is. And yes, obviously we talked about Hideki, who is definitely, you know, the Masters champion, who's now is a living legend in terms of, you know, the people in Japan. And yes, so we're talking about cricket now. Yes, talking about England versus New Zealand, the first test that actually came up to the end, and it was the day 5, and the match ended in a draw. And New Zealand were 62 for 2 at stumps, and they had to lead. Obviously, it swelled to 165. Rory Burns managed to score 132 runs, which actually was for the rescue of England. And, you know, initially the game was one-sided. People were more inclined towards seeing New Zealand make that victory, but obviously it ended up coming to a conclusive side that, you know, the game ended up in a draw. And I think a lot of people out there and a lot of critics out there surely would never wanted to see a draw after 5 days of the tournament, but that's how cricket test matches work. But anyways, this was cricket. I'll quickly jump over to the world of tennis. Yes, talking about the world of tennis and the updates, and, you know, in terms of French Open. Serena Williams is finally out. Yes, she's out of the French Open on the 4th round, and she lost 6-3, 7-5 by a 21-year-old, Alina, and which is super interesting to see, because obviously Serena Williams has a lot of titles on her shoulder, but the point is the last that she got, the Grand Slam, that was in 2017. So it has been a tricky journey for her. And I think with time, now that she's growing, obviously she's pretty in terms of she's in 30s now, so she solely is trying to get this one victory or any Grand Slam, because the last that she got, as mentioned, was on the 2017th. But anyways, we want to talk about the next thing. Yes, we want to talk about Roger Federer, that he managed to push off and out of the French Open. Why? Because he had 2 knee injuries, and he also tweeted about his discussion with his team that he's finally decided to step out of the French Open. And obviously he said that he does not want to push his body, but he wants to look into the road to recovery. And he said that he's also thrilled that he's gotten 3 matches under his belt that in this tournament, but there is no greater feeling than being back on court. And yes, the 39-year-old is back. He managed to play 3 games, and obviously a lot of people like Andy Murray also tweeted for him in terms of him making his comeback. But yes, we would rather wish him recovery to begin with, and I think things would go fine for him. Anyways, jumping over to the world of football. Yes, talking about the world of football, Kevin De Bruyne actually won the PFA Player of the Year award. The Manchester City Burnley won the 2nd successive season. He played a crucial role to run the Champions League final. And but yes, not to forget that Champions League final, unfortunately, they managed to lose against Chelsea. But yet again, he's still termed as the best player by the PFA Player of the Year. And he's the 3rd man to win the PFA award in consecutive year. And Cristiano Ronaldo earlier had managed to win that in 2007 and 2008. And this has been an interesting journey, and not to forget that De Bruyne actually contributed to 10 goals, 18 assists to City to cause 40 outings. So it has been an interesting journey in terms of the Player of the Year award, and I think it's definitely going to be an interesting take. And this was the 39th time that someone has been awarded this, and his 2nd consecutive one. But anyways, guys, this was pretty much it from the world of sports. You can reach out to us on our social media handle, which is @Indus News Sports. That works for Twitter and for Instagram. Anyways, till then, take good care of yourself, and bye-bye.